Okay, so today we have a guest speaker, Nicole McKibben. She was an ATI graduate, did animal science in Columbus, and then went on to further and better, bigger things. And I would like her to try to enlighten you on where she's been and what her journey has been.
Hello, everybody. As Dr. Linden said, my name is Nicole McKibben. So I was at ATI. I graduated in spring of 15, and then I went down to Columbus, and I graduated in 2016 with my bachelor's in animal science. And when I was done in Columbus, I actually moved to Idaho, and I worked for the USDA research center, specifically the sheep experiment station out in Idaho. And I was running a feedlot studies for them for about a year. And what happened was the study that I was working on, they said, if you find a university that will take you on, you can have this as your master's research. And so I ended up finding a professor at the University of Wyoming. He was just transferring from Montana, and he said, perfect, I'm looking for students. So that worked out, and I graduated with my master's in animal science in 2019 from the University of Wyoming. And so when I was done there, I switched gears a little bit and actually started working in one of the slaughter facilities that I use for my research and quality assurance. I was the quality assurance supervisor for the cold side, fabrication and case ready. Unfortunately, that company was bought out by JBS, and I switched to Superior Farms, is where I work now, and I'm the assistant quality assurance manager at Superior Farms.
What do you do for quality assurance?
So my department covers the entire plant, my team. So we're over harvest, fabrication, and case ready. And so we are doing regulatory and internal audits, looking for and tracking food safety, as well as the quality of the product that we're sending out from Superior. Superior Farms we're the largest packer of lamb in the United States. So we have a plant here in Denver, and we have a sister plant harvest facility in Dixon, California. And we also have box in, box out facilities in Chicago and Pennsylvania. And then we have a pet food plant in Iowa.
Oh, interesting. So is that where I'm getting my my lamb and rice dog food from?
Potentially.
Potentially? Okay.
Yeah.
Now, with your quality assurance, does that also cover like HACCP training and kind of tracking the potential spread of foodborne illness, or is it more along the lines of trying to make sure the product is healthy, but also trying to make sure it looks pretty?
Answer is yes. So we are cover all of those things. So we do HACCP audits that are tracking our critical control points in our process. And these are things that the USDA, our in-house USDA, look at every single day to make sure, mostly temperatures is what we're looking at, to make sure temperatures leaving harvest is correct, temperatures leaving the holding coolers are correct, temperatures going into the fabrication are correct, and the temperatures of the product that we're using in case ready are also acceptable. But then we have other audits that are just for quality purposes. So we'll go through and look at product that's already packaged and boxed and make sure that the product styling is correct, the labels are correct, the price is correct, the barcode is correct, it's in the correct size box, the pack arrangement is correct, all of those things.
Okay, so you cover everything.
Yes. So something you might also hear is quality assurance. So a lot of times quality assurance and quality control are used interchangeably. But if you think about it, quality assurance, we're doing audits that are assuring the quality of the product that we are producing, while quality control implies that we are actually controlling the process to achieve that quality that we're looking for. So while our department and our function is more QA, here we're called QC, but they're usually very interchangeable. Hear them out.
I never would have thought of that. That's kind of interesting. I had a girl ask yesterday in class, why are we so worried about E. coli 0157H7 when usually single to double digit people die per year with that, as opposed to serious illnesses like influenza, now the Rona, things like that. So why is the food safety from E. coli is so important?
Well, first of all, you don't want to be part of that single digits, right?
Yeah.
That, and also, I mean, this is well, it's the USDA standard. I mean, this is
Hmm.
something that we are legally obligated. We have to track per the USDA. Um, so there's lots of things that so for example, I was talking about temperatures earlier. Our temperature that we're looking for is 42.6 specifically, and why that temperature is because that is the temperature where we say listeria specifically is going to start growing at. And so we need our carcasses to be at or below that temperature within 24 hours, and then need to stay at or below that temperature
Okay.
to avoid the growth of any of these foodborne pathogens, or any no goods that are going to be growing on the product.
Awesome. Now, your master's research, I found
Yeah.
very interesting. I've read, I didn't want to tell you this, but I've actually read several of your master's papers that you published. Um, so I find the idea of developing um, a composite sire line, I find that very
Huh.
interesting. Um,
Yes.
I've said for years Ohio State needs to do that. Specify that it has to have a red face, and then we can have a Buckeye breed of sheep. But no one wants to. No one listens to me on that one.
I'm on board. Listen, now you've got one on board.
They said that we would only need to start with about 4,000 sheep to do it right. So as soon as we can get the land mass to do 4,000, we'll see what we can do.
Let's do it.
Um,
Yeah.
I think all we need is like two good sponsors, that are totally loaded, or all of us to hit the lottery at the same, like alternating months, so we actually make some cash. Um, but I find I find the introduction and development of new breeds to be very interesting.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah, especially in this day and age when we're like, it's 2021, we have everything figured out, right?
right,
And also coming from the East Coast, talk about a culture shock when you go west and you actually see some of these things in action, and exactly what you're talking about. And I think, that's something I wish I could bring all of your students out and just show them one of these days what we're actually, because
we
it's
we
it's
actually
one thing to realize, and it's another thing to actually see it.
yeah we actually looked into that several years ago about bringing 5 to 10 students to the sheep experiment station, and
Yeah.
it came down to we just couldn't swing it from a travel standpoint, but it is something that's in my the back of my brain that I would love to do.
Mhm.
Partly because I haven't been out there, and I
Yeah.
would love to see it. I did
Mhm.
have a student that did an internship. Um, oh, I want to say she was in Montana, but she did a 12-week internship between two farms that were next to each other, and
Okay.
between the two farms, they were running about 3,000 head.
Yeah.
And I kept picking on her about how different is that than your 8 ewes that you have at home for 4-H. And the difference between the range flocks and the eastern farm flocks, Ohio right now, if you ignore 4-H kids, we're running 38-ish sheep per farm. A
Yeah.
little
Yeah.
different, a little different once you get west of the Mississippi. Um, the first time I ever saw more than 1,000 sheep on pasture at one time was eastern Kansas, and that to me was shocking. I've seen
Yeah.
that many. I've seen that many in a feedlot. I've seen that many in sale barns, things like that, but never on
Mhm.
pasture. So I I
Mhm.
was I thought that was pretty cool. But so this sire breed that they're developing,
Yeah. Yes.
it's composite of, I believe they said 4 breeds. Um,
So yes. So the study that I was working on is a multiple phase study, and I was in on phase two.
okay,
So phase one was a little bit of a different story. They were using um, well, I guess I should just start out. They were comparing these terminal sire breeds based on the carcass characteristics and the growth characteristics of their offspring. So for that first phase, they were using Ramble AUs, just Ramble AUs, and they were crossing them on. I do have some of this in front of me. I've slept some since I've done. Uh, they've they use Suffolk, Texel, Columbia, and a composite that was created at US Mark there in
Right.
Nebraska. So, and that was that composition of that composite was a little bit different than the one that we used in my study, which was
Okay.
phase 2.
Okay.
So phase 1 was early 2000s, and then phase 2 was when I did my research. So 15, 16, and 17. Those were the years that we were that this phase 2 was conducted. And so we were only using 3 different sires. So we were just looking at Suffolk, Sire Max, which is a breed that was created by the producers basically, but it is a composite. And then the composite that we made at the research station, which was a little bit different composition from the US Mark. Ours was 3/8 Columbia, 3/8 Suffolk, and just a quarter Texel. I don't have it in front of me, but I believe that US Mark composite also had Hamp in it, maybe.
I thought so.
But it was the 4 breeds, and then the one we used was just a 3 breed composite.
Okay. And some of the numbers I was looking at the trimmed carcass weights, and the Suffolk sired lambs were heavier, but
Yes.
I thought it was interesting that statistically significant, but if you actually
Mhm.
compared like direct numbers, it was less than 2 pound different, I think, between the carcasses.
I think in my thesis we had 3.57 pounds
Okay. Okay.
of a of a heavier hot carcass weight from those Suffolk sired lambs.
Okay. But that was the hot
Yeah,
carcass weight, not the trimmed weight.
the hot carcass weight, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Um, is that really worth it?
Well, what are you going for? So if we take that 3 point whatever pounds, and based on at the time, based on the carcass prices per pound, it was something like $12, between 12 and 13 per head.
Yeah.
And so working at a slaughter facility now, I can tell you, lambs come to us in lots. And so
Right.
that's basically 1 truckload. And there's about 300 lambs per truckload. So if you've got 12 to 13 bucks per lamb for 300 heads, what's that like? It's like $3,700. So I think it depends on what you're going for, because something that research was suggesting when it came to, because the Suffolks, everything was pretty comparable between that TSC composite and the Suffolk, if you look at the results, other than hot carcass weight and weaning weight. So it just depends on what you're going for, I think. Now, I think if we saw more differences in survival rates with those composites, if that's something that we could focus on when they go on to phase 3, and they really looked at increasing survival rates of those composite lambs, then you could make up your difference right there. And so then you have more maternal lambs, all very comparable. Also, if we received any sort of pelt credit, those composites would have an advantage over the Suffolks.
Well, I know for me personally, I don't like black-faced sheep. I never have. I
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't say never have. I did when I was 11, and then I hit 13 and I hated them again. But so for me, having something that is either a brockle face or a white face sire, to me is worth something aesthetically.
Yeah.
Um, but I've talked to packers, and a lot of them don't like the white face lambs because they assume they're not going to grow well.
Yeah.
Did you guys see any of that? Either the prejudice or the or actually like real numbers?
No, not necessarily. Also, since I've been working for packers, it's been kind of a turbulent time between coronavirus and just seasonality, and I don't necessarily see one way or the other, but I guess just based on what I see on a daily basis, mostly are going to be those brockle faces, or they call them smut faces out here.
Okay.
And we do still see quite a few white face lambs come through, and and I see the fewest of the black face and hair sheep. but we do still get those.
Okay. What's your thought on
Like,
the hair sheep?
huh?
What is your thought on the hair sheep?
My thoughts on the hair sheep. Well, from my current position that I'm in, quality
Yeah.
assurance, we don't like them because we have to find ways to deal with the hair
Okay.
that ends up. So that's very frustrating for us. But other than that, I mean, size wise, they're pretty comparable with everything else that we
Okay.
see. Every once in a while, we'll get mixed lots. So like random lot buys out of other states closer to east, and those mix lots will have, you name it. I've seen Tunis in here, I've seen Dorper in here, I've seen Shetlands. I'm pretty sure they were I mean, I've seen some wild stuff. Romanovs came through one day, and I'm trying to ask people. I'm like, our USDA veterinarian that's here. I'm like, do you happen to know? I'm like, I'm not crazy, right? That's a Romanov. He's like, I wouldn't know, and I'm like, all right, well, I would, and I'm telling you, I'm pretty sure that's a Romanov. But yeah, you day to day, you kind of never know what you're going to see in here, but on the hair sheep, they're pretty comparable size wise to
Okay.
most.
I was talking with a Texel breeder the other day, and he was poo-pooing the hair sheep, saying that they were too slab-shouldered and not muscled enough. And my only thought on that was I've seen some Dorpers that were as wide with muscle as they are tall. So um, I still think you can get good carcasses out of some of those hair sheep, but
Yeah,
maybe not
I would agree.
maybe not the maybe not some of the like the Barbados black belly or something like that. That's
Uh-huh.
there's no reason to have that. But um, one of the things we talked about in class the other day was according to the sheep production handbook, the SID book, there are 49 breeds of sheep that they have in that book that they
Okay.
say are common or semi-common breeds of sheep.
Okay.
And my only thought was we've got a lot of breeds that we've developed that don't seem like they were developed to take over. Like the Delayed Merino was designed to take over everything in Arizona, New Mexico, southern Utah, and
Uh-huh.
they didn't. And then we developed the Targhee, which was supposed to take over everything that was in the semi-mountainous regions, and they didn't. And we
Hmm.
developed the Columbia, and I'm seeing more Columbias for show than I ever have for for Western flocks.
Right.
So is it a lost cause to develop a new breed?
No, no, I don't
Okay.
think so.
Why
I
is
mean,
that?
think so. Well, let's think about these composites. Well, why composite? So obviously, okay, well, let's go back to you're talking about Eastern US versus Western US. Have approximately 40% of the lamb crop coming out of the Western US. There's like 5 states that they're coming out of 40% of the lambs. And 70% of those lambs are started range. And then once they're weaned, they're taken into some sort of dry lot setting to be finished.
Mhm.
So we need animals that are going to be able to gain while they're out on pasture before they're weaned when they're still with mom. And we also need them to be able to transition into a dry lot and be able to handle that higher concentration of corn and still grow, without any. So, well, what breeds do those things best? Our white-faced maternal were created and made to be out on the range and still grow, eating that forage-based diet. And our black faces, they are larger framed animals, and they convert. All of the studies show they convert that feed really, really well to, for example, higher hot carcass weights.
Mhm.
And mix those, we're looking for the best of both worlds, basically.
Right.
So that's why composites. And so if we have breeds that excel in those things, that's what we need. Because you're never gonna have one animal from each of those categories that's going to be the best at both. So I mean, that's why, right? I mean, heterosis, that's one.
Well, and what I
That's why
was gonna, I'm sorry,
I
what?
think there's different there's different situations, like your situation, your ranch may be different from my ranch, and there's different breeds that are going to work in these different situations. And so, I mean, that's why I think it's very beneficial to have different breeds to choose from, so that you can still get the same results regardless of you know, northwest, southeast, wherever you're at.
But can I get that with the what we're currently doing with the terminal sires, where we're taking those mostly Rambouillet based ewes and crossing either the Suffolk or the Hamp onto them and getting that heterosis just from the terminal sire side?
Just from the terminal sire side?
I mean, instead of creating a composite breed, can't we get that same amount of heterosis, the same amount of growth spark that we're looking for with just a terminal cross from either Suffolk or a Hamp?
I will, yes, I would say theoretically yes, as far as the results from the lamb. But again, I think it kind of depends on what your production is.
Okay.
Because, those animals, well, so for example, when we were creating the composite, and something that's mentioned in my thesis is that we source genetics from all over the US. And
Right.
if I were to do this, and I would think maybe it should be a little more regionalized, targeting the area that we're seeing the majority of the lambs coming from, if that makes sense.
Yeah, or I think if I understand what you're saying is instead of getting to make the composite, instead of getting used from Minnesota and Texas and Washington, maybe we should have a U base that is Washington and then another U base that's South Texas. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. And same with the sire genetics as well. I know some of our Suffolk rams that we used were out of like Virginia. And so when we bring them to Idaho and ask them to perform the same way, they don't. We're putting them in a range setting, and they don't last as long as those Suffolks that originated from
And that's
Montana.
that's actually my second biggest concern with the Suffolk. First is they've gotten too damn big.
Yeah,
I
very
mean
large.
the Suffolks that are 400 plus pounds, just I don't think they have a good purpose other than the show industry.
Mhm.
And the show industry is an extremely important part of the small ruminant production. As an industry, it's very important. It gets people interested in the animals. So I think it's a really good subset of the industry. But I think
Uh-huh.
that too many of the commercial producers are too passive, and we're
Mhm.
we're letting that show side drive a little more than I think they should. Um, but yeah, the Suffolks that I grew up with that were, a 300-pound ram was huge, is a lot different than, the 400 plus pound rams that we're seeing today. So
Yeah.
I think that the variation within the breed um, could be could be a factor. And like you said, with the ones that are moving from the East Coast to the Western Range, they're not going to hold up.
Uh-uh.
So
And that's something, as far as how sheep are raised, sometimes I don't know how else to describe it other than, so in these flock situation on range situations, the sheep are working for you and you need them to work for you. And in Eastern, show flocks, hobby farms, that sort of thing, we're working for the sheep. I mean, we're
yeah,
so
yeah, plain and simple.
yeah.
What I'm trying to convince people is um, the sheep shouldn't be the sheep should be there to harvest the grass. If you pay attention to the grass, the sheep will grow.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that we need the smaller people to kind of push that a little harder. It's different when you're grazing federal lands or um, when you're running them up the mountain, and then next time they come see that pasture, they're there next year to run up the mountain. And
Mhm.
parasites are different, and I think that I know personally growing up, I didn't understand any of that. I didn't understand that you hit the Mississippi River and everything changes.
Yeah.
So now you're an Ohio kid.
Yes.
You said it was culture shock when you went west. Um,
Yes.
is it enough culture shock you'd flee back? or are you happy within that shocking culture?
I that's a hard question at this point. I've liked it enough to stay. That's for
That's
sure.
that's true. That's
But,
true.
but yeah, so I started in Idaho, was in Wyoming for 2 years, and then I've been in Colorado for about 2 years now as well. So I think I think honestly, having the education and then the experience coming from Ohio and the things that we do with sheep there and coming out here, it's honestly just refreshing to see, because we talk about it and then you see it being put to use. When I was interning at the sheep station, I was actually doing sage grouse research. That was part of my biggest project while I was out there. But they would let me work sheep on big days that they needed a lot of help working all of the sheep, for example. So I remember we had about 700 ram lambs to go through and score. So we talk about it, but to actually be there and doing it, like, okay, we're scoring horns, we're scoring eyes, we're scoring wool cover, we're scoring testicles, we're scoring feet and legs. And they're literally making notes on all of these sheep a couple times a year and making production decisions based off of that. And so it's like, wow, that's that's going to sound silly to people who are out here. Because they're like, well, yeah, duh, how else did we do it? But then when you've just heard about it, and actually see some of that in action, I'm like, yes, like that's what these breeds were made for. That's what they're able to do. This is the issues you have with those breeds, and that's what we need to be looking out for.
Okay. So, what's the biggest thing you've seen that is bad out there?
That is bad. As far as production in general,
Just
or
just the industry as a whole.
just the industry as a whole. So going back to those hot carcass weights, it's a little bit frustrating because I would consider myself to have a pretty wide view of industry from start to finish, and even being on like the quality assurance and the plant side of it as well. When we have hot carcass weights, sometimes, not always, that applies more fat cover. Um, and so what is the use of having these bigger lambs if instead of a 1/4 inch of fat, they have 3/4 of an inch of fat, and it's that much more labor for the packer to have to stop and trim all of that to get the product to spec? Well, and then sure, we can sell some of that or use it for grind or something like that. But ultimately, I mean, it's more in labor cost, and those heavy lambs, they're ruining equipment in the plants. They're hard on the equipment, they're hard on the people. Our plant, we whole roll carcasses to the East Coast, and we still load by hand.
Okay.
So, that's really hard on those employees who are having to manhandle these ginormous carcasses. So
Now,
while
when you say ginormous, what size are you talking?
So I'm talking carcasses that come in. I've seen carcasses up 200 pounds,
Wow.
150 and above,
Okay.
140 and above. I don't want to be, carrying those by hand. That's huge. So
I don't want to eat them when they're that big either because it's gonna be tough.
yeah, yeah. So I think that's something. There's incentive for these lambs to be big, regardless of whether it's actually more meat and more muscle, or whether it's just big animal and there's a lot of fat.
Okay.
I think that's something that we could, and by we I mean producers, could start looking at. Um, Something that we found with research that's been done at Wyoming in general is, like, we used a camera grade and the USDA grade for my research, and we found that a good camera grading system gives you a pretty accurate picture, sometimes a little more accurate than the actual USDA grade, because if you think about it, you've got measurements to be going off of versus just someone's, you know,
Visual.
you know. Um, so we don't currently have a camera grading system here. That's going to be, they don't have it in place. They have it. They just need the training for it, basically. But that's something that Mountain States did, and that's something that our sister plant in Dixon does do right now. And so that information, being able to give that to producers so they can start making production decisions based on that information, I think would be really good. It's like, okay, I've got these animals, I know what their live weight is, I know what the hot carcass weight is, but what is that actually, what is it? So, you know,
Do you think we need to move away from hot carcass and move to actual trimmed carcass weights?
yes, I think I do, because I mean, I think we use hot carcass weights sometimes. That's an easy measurement to get.
Right.
Um, but there's something that we use that was in my study, and that was trimless, estimated boneless, closely trimmed retail cuts,
Hmm.
and it is exactly what it sounds like. It's the estimated amount of um,
What's
consumer
usable?
consumer ready product. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, and I think that's, if you can use the camera grade and the hot carcass weight and get a really good estimation of what you're going to get, I think something like that is very beneficial for the producers to start making decisions based off of.
Okay. Describe your perfect lamb.
My perfect lamb.
Perfect lamb.
So breed, like it's breed or it's
Whatever you define perfect as. That could be breed, size, growth rate, whatever. But what would you, if I told you to pick the perfect lamb right this minute, what would it be?
I think so. I'm making my decision based off of trying to make everybody happy. And I do think,
Which that's in your part of your job.
yes, 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 I do think um, it's going to be, I'm not, okay, it's going to be something with Suffolk in it. Not necessarily composite, but probably have used the Suffolk as the terminal sire. Um, and I think when it comes to carcass, since it's an easy measurement and that's currently what we're using a lot of, I'm gonna want that carcass around 100 pounds.
Okay. So live weight, what are you expecting?
Um, Maybe something just shy of 200, 180, 200, something like that.
Okay. See, in my head, that's too big. Um,
Yeah.
but a lot of the uh, a lot of the 150-pound lambs that I'm seeing
Mhm.
have no back fat.
Yeah.
But I'm seeing mostly show lambs.
Hmm.
So for me, 150 to 160-pound live weight lamb, um, they're not even going to have close to a tenth of an inch of back fat. So to me, it's just that's a weird number for me in my head to process. Um,
Uh-huh.
Growing up, everyone wanted 125-pound live weight. That was
Yeah.
and times change. I understand that, and we've
Right.
moved on. But like I said, 190 pound just to me sounds like a monster.
A monster of a lamb. Yeah, there's a need for all of it. So our smaller carcasses, smaller being 60, 80 pounds, a lot of those are the ones we're whole rolling east.
Okay,
And
which
the
is what
larger,
that's what I'm more familiar with.
yes, and the larger ones we're processing here, and those are for our obviously it's going through fab, but we also if we think about our case ready, if we have from the plant size and from a quality side, not necessarily food safety but quality, if we have a little extra fat on some of those loins, for example, if we're making loin chops, we're able to trim those loins and make every single piece uniform.
Right,
So each one
right.
have, the same amount of fat. Every chop is gonna, even if the chops are not the same size, the chops in the package can have the same amount of fat on them. So I completely understand where you're coming from, but there's a need for all of it. And as it goes right now, there's still incentive for the packers to be receiving those larger lambs. The deficit with the employees and the extra labor and being harder on the employees and their bodies has not outweighed them,
No,
having some.
workers are easily replaced.
Yeah, yeah. So um they do like the larger lambs,
Okay.
which we here at our Denver facility, we're kind of hitting more areas than our Dixon, obviously. So we see quite a bit larger lambs here than they would on the West Coast.
Okay. What's your thought on roaster lambs?
On a roaster lambs, what's my thought on them as far as I
Is
know
is I'm sorry, what?
we don't see too many of those here. Every once in a while, but
I don't know if your plant touched those at all or not.
some of the carcasses that are whole rolled, yeah.
Okay.
But we don't process those here.
Okay. Where do you see the industry going?
Where do I see the industry going?
Because when I ask the old guys this kind of question, they mumble that basically everything's changing and things are getting weird and they just mumble under their breath and kind of walk away. But as somebody that's newer to the industry, because
Uh-huh.
you are relatively new to the industry as far as the processing side at least, where are we going?
Well, I think off of their comment, in some cases it needs to get weird and it needs to change and it needs to be a little bit uncomfortable for some people because um, from our standpoint, we're gearing the industry in general is trying to target like millennials, younger couples, to and entice them to try lamb, because obviously we're not anywhere near competing with beef or poultry at this point. And I'm not even sure that's exactly what we're trying to do. But I mean, we need to stay in business, right? So I think it's important, and they're doing that lots of different ways. We talk about, because there's no when you talk about the industry as a whole, and you have, for example, two such different, the West and the East, and the size of the flock and their goal.
And the
It's really
breed choice and
it's you're never going to come up with something consistent across the board, but we can still improve consistency, I think, with whatever we're trying to do. So from like a product development standpoint, we want to have things available to consumers that are easy to use, basically. So, they've beefed up marketing and they've beefed up ready to eat products and that sort of thing. And I think that's good. I think that's a really good direction to take. And I guess that's kind of where I stand at this point, being from kind of standing from the Packer side, and maybe not.
do we need to keep the sheep industry as a niche market? Because you said we're not going to compete with chicken, pork, or beef.
Right.
Do we need to keep it as a niche or a luxury item, or um, do we need to are we trying to hit the specialty market, or do we need to eventually move to the general market as well?
I think as far as a protein we want in households, I think that in that instance, we need to be targeting as part of the general market. And as far as you talk about fiber, I guess I don't have as much of an opinion on that. But that's something I've seen. I don't know. There's a Instagram account called Experience Wool. And so since I've been out here, there's lots of different brands who are doing this marketing and, really marketing wool as like an athletic fiber.
Mhm.
It's naturally moisture wicking and flame resistant and all of those things. And so that's been nice to see. That's not something I noticed until here recently. And that could be because, I just maybe started paying more attention. But I think those types of things are all steps in the right direction anyway. But I think that as far as proteins in people's households, that's more general market, and less. No, I don't think we should treat it as a niche
Okay.
um,
Is it
item.
is there a place in the U.S. market for mutton?
Is there a place in the U.S. market for mutton?
Sheep die, sheep get old, sheep need to be culled. So right now, either you're shipping that somewhere that doesn't mind that flavor, but
Right.
is there is there currently, is there a market for mutton? And I would say probably not, but
No,
is there a place for that in your comment about we need to have some hit the general market for some of our protein? Is mutton a viable protein?
I think it's viable, but I don't think that I would use that as my standard for um, the texture or taste of lamb.
It's not.
Yeah, yeah, no, I don't think that, in no way, shape, or form, this is just as good or this is the same thing by any means. But when it comes to like, uh, I think more of like pet food and that sort of thing is what I think when I think mutton.
Yeah.
Not necessarily stuffed rendering, but like further processed
Okay.
uh, for that protein.
I think it's a good answer. All right, you ready for the final answer or final question?
Uh-oh. Yes.
Okay. You've done great so far. Just want to let you know you've done great so far. Um, what's your favorite lamb recipe?
My favorite lamb recipe. Okay. Well, there's lots that I think are good, but my favorite is you take, okay, chops in general, shoulder chops, loin chops usually. But I like a lamb chop, and you put that sucker in a cast iron just on the stove, okay? And just over medium heat, you're gonna do garlic, you're gonna do a little bit of lemon and some rosemary, a little salt and pepper, and that's it. And you're gonna kind of brown those on each side, and then I finish it in the oven, and that is my favorite. Like,
Temperature and time.
temperature and time. Well, I guess I don't uh temp any of my meat usually. I like stuff pretty rare.
I'm sorry, I meant temperature of the oven.
Oh, of the oven. I think I usually do 375 preheat.
375 for about how
Yeah,
long?
and not for very long at all. I do flip them, and I usually just do 3 to 4 minutes on each side.
Okay. That sounds like a
Yeah,
good recipe.
yeah. Anyone can handle that, I think.
Okay. So what we're going to tell people is get out there, try some lamb, try one of your
Yeah.
recipe, either your recipe or a couple
Mhm.
or the last video we did, we had a couple other recipes that were put on there. So hopefully we'll get some people to start thinking more about lamb.
Yes, hopefully.
I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for doing this.
You're
And
very
I look forward to doing this again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Talking to you.
Have a beautiful day, and I will talk to you in a little bit.
You too. Okay, it sounds good.
Thanks.